Now we are live from the studio this evening. So glad to see everyone back here this evening and pick up where we left off. So this will be, I guess, part 4 of my lessons and sharing some of my traveling experiences through Israel, through the Holy Land, and not to put in a shameless plug, but as a shameless plug, a sermon that I did over in Ogden, which you can find on the Buckhannon Church of Christ page, and then I've cross-posted it onto my YouTube channel, where I'm live streaming as well, just some Christian guy on YouTube and Facebook. I did a sermon out in Ogden titled, Seeing God's Holy Land in Ogden. So it could apply here, Seeing God's Holy Land in Buckhannon. And the thesis of that sermon was that no matter how many pictures and experiences I'm able to share, and for all the people that are able to have the opportunity to go to the quote-unquote Holy Land for themselves, to the point that Randall made in a comment he made on Sunday, that there's nothing holy about the land itself. And we're actually told by Paul in 1 Corinthians that's what's holy, what's the temple of God today is us. It's Christians. We are the holy land that God loves today. And truly, that is the land that we need to value first and foremost above all else. It is loving one another. That being said, the reason that I love to be able to share these experiences is something that Daryl had mentioned on Sunday. It's an evidence. It's an apologetic for the faith. This is validation that the Bible isn't just a book of myth and fairy tale. It's real places that you can go and you can walk today. You can go and see the sites where Jesus was 2,000 years ago, and King David and Solomon, and further back than that, Joshua and Moses. All these places are real. They're not made up. You can go and see these lands for yourselves. And in many places, you can bring back some of that. And so I'm glad that Dad made that point after we had stopped the recording, that these aren't Chinese knockoffs. This is the real deal. I was able to bring back some pottery and some chunks of rock wall that's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years old. And so it's an incredible evidence for our faith. And I think we've got the world band competition going on here in Buckhannon right now. We've got people from literally all over the globe that are flying to our small town for some reason to show off how talented they are. But how much time and money are people willing to spend to hear a message about God's Word? And to learn apologetic evidences for our faith, and to learn more about it. And so it's a testament to you all here that I came back on a Wednesday evening to get to learn more and to see more. And so I hope that what I have for the rest of this series and this presentation will be worthy of your time, coming from Morgantown and Elkins and all across Upshur County. And so I hope that it's very worthy of your time. I hope that you remember that everywhere else in Upshur County, we're filled with hundreds, thousands more people than normal right now in Buckhannon because of the event. The vast majority of those people don't know New Testament Christianity, and they certainly don't know much of the history I intend to share this evening. Most of this is stuff I learned too while I was there. And so take it and share it and spread the good news. And so we wrapped up with Jacob's Well. And so in the same region as Shechem, right, because Shechem was the town where Jacob's Well is located. Technically, if we're getting real technical, Jacob's Well is just outside of Shechem. But the area. Well, the region, so we're getting bigger, the region is known as Samaria, and this is where they have camels. They have camels in several places, and they also have really good food. They have really good food in several places, but at this little site was a restaurant that we went into, and there was 2 young boys, looked to maybe be 10, 11 years old, and they kept coming up and saying, $2 for a camel ride. And say, $2 camel ride, $2 camel ride. And we're on a very tight schedule. And so we went and did our little history tour, and we passed back by this camel who actually tried to eat my notebook while I'm sitting here taking notes, and it just came up and started eating. And the little boy is like, $2, ride a camel. I was like, no. I said, how much just for a picture with the camel? He said, $2, picture of the camel. I was like, you would do well in the United States. All right? So I gave him $2 and got a picture of the camel. Good for him trying to make it earn his living. 10 years old, all right? So, but Samaria this is the capital of the northern kingdom, right? So Israel is a united kingdom for a very, very brief time period. So you got the 12 tribes, and they want a king. So God gives them King Saul with the warning through the prophet Samuel, who we learned last time in Shiloh. Y'all don't want a king. Trust me. It's not going to be good for you. Well, the people were persistent, and so God said, you know what? Fine, you want a king? I'll give you a king. Here's King Saul. And they quickly learned how much they didn't want a king because it led to problem after problem. The kingdom, the tribes weren't actually united under Saul. Something else I took for granted in the text I never noticed before. But the tribes were still divided under Saul. It was 10 and 2. I can't remember off the top of my head which ones were with Saul and which ones were still on their own. But even in David's early reign, it wasn't until later in his reign that he united all 12 tribes. And that lasted all of 1.5 generations. So you've got David, and then you've got his son Solomon, who is the one who truly built up Israel to almost empire-level standard. He united the 12 tribes. He sets up an excellent trade economy throughout the region. And then Solomon's son Rehoboam takes over as king, and then implements some terrible policies, creates a civil war, and so the kingdom divides northern and southern Israel. Samaria becomes the capital of the northern kingdom after the 4th generation, I believe. It was in Tirzah for a while, moved to Samaria, and on a map, this is what it would look like. We were just coming from Shechem and Sychar. So Shechem's not listed, but Shechem and Sychar are right beside each other. So we're a good ways north of Jerusalem. We're in the region of Samaria, and we're in the city of what is known today as Sebaste. Herod the Great renamed the city Samaria. So there was the region Samaria, the city Samaria. Herod the Great, 1st century BC, renames it Sebaste. And he builds it up and refortifies it. It's destroyed by the Romans later on. And the king who moved the capital of Samaria here was Omri in 885 BC. And there's something really significant about the Omri line. Omri down to Joram, so 4 generations in which Samaria is on pace to outdo Jerusalem. Implements excellent trade and economy, builds up a large palace, is so powerful and rich that in the 720 BC, so over 150 years after Omri, a century and a half later, the Assyrian Empire, we have writings from ancient Assyria from 700 BC that still refer to Samaria as the land of Omri, because that is how powerful and wealthy he was. And here is a picture that I took standing at the outer fortifications for Omri's palace and fortified hilltop city. The ruins were so spread out, I couldn't take drone pictures here, and I wasn't able to get a good shot. But one of the reasons why Omri moved the capital of Samaria, or the capital of Israel, the northern kingdom, to Samaria, was because it was on a prominent hilltop in this region. And so what's the number one rule in battle? High ground. Anakin Skywalker should have learned that lesson. It would have saved him an arm and a leg, right? Or at least 2 legs. All right? And so he moves the capital up onto this hilltop, and it was so well fortified and so defensible because of the natural terrain. It's 360 like this. It's just lower valley with near cliff face all around, that when the Assyrian Empire comes to town, at the time the largest empire in the world in 720 BC, it took them 3 years to take the city. That's how well fortified it was. And so here's some more pictures of the ruins that were here. These were palace grounds for Omri. And what's really significant finding that was here through some archaeological excavations was they found a huge treasure trove of ivory that was found in a rock layer that was dating to the time of the Omride dynasty. And that ivory trove is a huge testament to the validity of the Bible, because Omri's son, who would become king, King Ahab, we have scripture that specifically tells us he builds a house of ivory. He was an ivory collector. Ivory is elephant tusk and hippopotamus teeth. And, hippopotamus are pretty large animals, and so are elephants. But it would take a whole lot of hippopotami, elephantises. It would take a lot of them to build a house out of teeth, okay? And they found a whole treasure trove here, which just validates the Bible's description of there being ivory here, significant amounts of ivory. And so here are some steps that led up to a temple that was built by Herod. And so a temple is being built by Herod the Great in the 1st century BC. 99 times out of 100, it's going to be dedicated to Augustus Caesar. And so in the 1st century BC, there was a temple. Herod takes the former palace of ancient Israel, turns it into a temple dedicated to Augustus Caesar. But the underlaying layer, so this first step that's visible here, it actually dates back to that ancient Israel, Northern Kingdom time period. And so Herod just built upon what was already there. And when Rome comes into power, or sorry, before Rome, when Alexander the Great comes into town and conquers the city and takes it over, he built a number of structures as well. And this is just kind of cool, not necessarily biblically relevant, but this is the oldest known structure from Alexander's empire. It's a Hellenistic, so Hellenistic being Macedonia, Alexander the Great. You're looking 300 BC time period. There was a guard tower on the outer wall of the city, where it makes sense to build a guard tower. And so this is the best well-preserved structure across all of Alexander's empire. So it's just kind of cool that's found here in ancient Samaria. Of course, Herod also loves theater, so he built a theater here as well. There was an agora, which is a Greco-Roman marketplace. So during the time of Rome, the time of Herod the Great, there was a large marketplace. So 2,000 years ago, all of these columns, if you've seen the Disney movie Hercules, when teenage Hercules is very accident-prone and he's playing a game of Frisbee, gets a little too rough, and he knocks down the large colonnade where people are doing the markets. So that type of structure would have been here during the time of Jesus. And then this site, the same area, we're all still on the same hilltop here. There's just different parts of the hilltop. There was a church in the Byzantine time, so that would be after Constantine, after 300 AD. There was a church that was built here, venerating this place, placing special honor on it as a place where John the Baptist was buried. Now, we don't actually know if that's true. The oldest account of this tradition does only date to the 3 to 400s AD. There's nothing really older than that. But that's what this ancient church, this used to be a church, was built there for, was in honor of John the Baptist as being where he was buried. Now as we move forward, I'm going to skip through this fairly quickly because this was in the sermon from Sunday. This is showing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So the place of the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus. And so this is a map of modern day Jerusalem. So just to get awareness of kind of where everything's located, this red line, red wall here is the Temple Mount. Today, there's the Dome of the Rock located here. This is a holy site for the Muslims. They built it exactly where the temple was during the time of Jesus, in the exact spot. And it's because, I could be getting this wrong. I haven't read up on Islamic religion in a while, but I think this is the place where Muhammad received a vision from an angel or from Allah or something. But he received a vision here, and that's why it's considered a holy spot. And then I'm going to be throwing some maps at you here just for reference, for scale. This is the same city, Jerusalem. What this is showing is the wall systems at different time periods. And all this is showing is that Golgotha, the place of the Holy Sepulchre, where the crucifixion and burial were located, were outside of the walls during the time of Jesus. So the second wall was built by Herod the Great in the orange, and then the site of the crucifixion was just outside the city wall. And you've seen this picture. I'm not going to go through all that again. Here's the outside of the church. I didn't have that on Sunday. From the outside, for a Catholic church, it's relatively plain. There's one quick story to share here, and it's hard to see with our projector here. It's kind of dark, but you might be able to faintly make it out. There's a ladder that's left on a balcony that's right here. This ladder, they've done dating on it. It dates to 1700 AD. The dating being, they have historical writings from the 1700s about this ladder. That ladder is pretty significant because this church was considered of such significance to the Christian faith that no one denomination or faith group should have sole possession of it. So there was an ecumenical council from different Christian belief sets, that were in charge of preserving the church here. And this ladder, there's no record of who put the ladder there or why. Probably climb things, but there's no record of how it got there. But there's records of this ecumenical council of Christian leaders arguing over what to do with the ladder. And because they couldn't agree on what to do with it, it got so heated that they said, obviously we can't get along, and if we can't get along, we probably shouldn't be in charge of this church. So they appointed a Muslim family to be the caretakers for the church. And so since the 1700s, the same bloodline of Muslim family is still there taking care of the church. And so I got to meet the caretaker kind of indirectly. His name's Omar, but his family is the caretakers for this church since the 1700s. So it's just kind of cool the way that tradition has been passed down from his family. Of course, I just wish Christians could get along a little better so that they can take the ladder down, but it makes for a good sermon illustration, okay? So the only other thing I'll say, because you've seen this picture, you've seen the Archaeological where Jesus was laying, you've seen the contraband picture. This is a first century tomb. Now in the first century, there's not a building over top, right? So this would be a hillside, and you come out of the tomb and you'd be looking up at the stars, but that tomb that's located here actually does date to the first century. I'll skip the blueprint. This picture is significant that I didn't include in the sermon. The reason this picture is so powerful is that it reads in Latin, "Lord, we went." And it has a picture of a shipping vessel from the time, seemingly a quote from Psalms 122:1 about making a pilgrimage for God. And this picture dates to the time of when the Temple of Venus was still standing. So during the Roman Empire's still pagan control of this land, you had Christians making a pilgrimage to this site, risking their lives to worship Jesus here, and leaving graffiti as their mark to give praise to Jesus and to God. And so I can't really, it would be like sneaking into Mecca, into the Dome of the Rock, a Muslim holy site, and inscribing something about Jesus there. So a testament to their faith, these Christians who did this. So May 28th, as I'm going through, I'm going to start speed up a little bit because some of these sites are just kind of cool to look at. I'm not going to give a full background of all the history of all of them. But very, very significant for apologetic purposes. Outside of Jerusalem, they found what's known as the Caiaphas ossuary. The ossuary, it's a bone box. And so the common practice at the time, and this is very significant because ossuaries were only used for a very brief time during the 1st century AD, only used by Jews for a very short time in the 1st century AD. So to find a Jewish ossuary in Jerusalem, it's almost a certain fact that this is from the 1st century. But they're able to date it more specifically to about the middle of the 1st century AD. And the box is labeled as belonging to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest, who was party to Jesus' arrest. And ossuaries are typically very plain. So all of this decorative ornamentation, you would only find this on a very significant person. Us lay people, we would just get a little clay box and our bones would be put in it. So the way it works, somebody would die, they would get buried in a tomb, their family would come back a year later, pull the bones out, and put them in this box. And it was preservation for the resurrection, was the intent here. And so they have found, there were bones when they found it, of an approximately 50 to 60-year-old man, labeled as the house of Caiaphas, in an ornamental ossuary. It is almost certain, there's very little disagreement, they have found the bones of the high priest Caiaphas. And what a poetic justice that the man who had Jesus arrested, his tomb was found filled and Jesus' tomb was found empty. And I think that's incredibly powerful to the gospel message of Christ. Now, Mount of Olives. Jesus does a lot of teaching here. To put it in perspective, ignore these red arrows. I just found these pictures off the internet because I can't fly a drone here. I would get in all kinds of trouble if I flew a drone here. In the 1st century, there was a bridge from the temple across the valley over to this hillside. This hillside was Mount Olives. It was just outside of Jerusalem. It's called Mount Olives because it's an olive grove. It's been an olive grove for thousands of years. It hasn't changed. There's still olive trees that grow there today. In the time of David, it was an olive grove. So if you remember back to the shepherd's fields, how it's always been shepherd's field, Mount Olives, it's always been an olive grove. And when Jesus gives his teaching about temple destruction, he's standing on the Mount of Olives. And when you are standing on the Mount of Olives and you're looking out, because I did take this picture, what do you see? The temple. And so this is the area where Jesus is standing when he gives the teaching of the destruction of Jerusalem. And so when he's with his disciples on Mount Olives, he could just point to the city right there and say, this will be no more. Matthew 24, for anybody who wants to read into that a little bit more. But Mount Olives, significant part for Jesus' ministry. We got the worship here. There's a little area here. These are olive trees, these little short guys. There's a better picture of the olive trees. I've never seen an olive tree before. I mean, you can just go on Google and see a better picture than this. But these are olive trees on olives that I took here. Whitewashed tombs. So just beside where the olive groves are, there's a huge burial ground with all these tombs. And when Jesus remarks that the Pharisees are like whitewashed tombs, he's on the Mount of Olives. He very easily could be pointing over to this graveyard, just right across the way, just 100 meters or so to the, I say to the left because I'm directionally shot, to the south, 100 meters to the south, be pointing to these tombs where all of these burials are, these whitewashed tombs, and saying that the Pharisee are like those dead bones. How they're decorated on the outside with all their garments and their garb, but on the inside they're just dead because they have not rightly followed him. Gethsemane, we don't know the exact area of the Garden of Gethsemane. We know it would be on this hillside, but there is a place, there is a church. I can't remember when the church was built, but it's called the Church of All Nations, and the reason it's called that, it's oddly ecumenical, coming from some flavor of Catholic background. It's because they receive donations from multiple countries around the world, so they call it the Church of All Nations, and it's built at the place that is traditionally held as the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed while being betrayed on the night of his arrest. And so they've got a very beautiful garden that they still maintain. While I get my notes caught up here, I'll go ahead and go to the next picture. This is what the church looks like from the outside. It's very beautiful. Again, it's some flavor of Catholic origin. I can't tell you which one off the top of my head. I didn't make a note of that. And then the area of Pilate's judgment seat. We talked about this on Sunday, so I'm just going to skip through this for sake of time. The Tower of David. So I was able to take this picture from the top of the Tower of David. And so the Tower of David, not as important as it sounds. When the Crusaders came to town during the 1100s AD, right, they're coming over to conquer Jerusalem that's under Islamic control. And when the Crusaders come into the city, they see this magnificent, large fortress. And the Crusaders say, a fortress of this magnitude could only belong to a great king. It must belong to King David. Which sounds good in theory, but the problem is it really only dates to King Hezekiah a few hundred years after David. So this does not belong. And the structures, most of the structures that you see today, let me see it on the map. So here's the Temple Mount, here's the Tower of David, and here's just a model of the Tower of David, so you get an idea of how large these towers are. Here's another picture of the Tower of David. So remember Herod's palace, time of Pilate, Pilate's judgment seat down here, Tower of David. These fortresses right here belonged to originally Hezekiah, built up by Herod the Great. And so what Herod the Great does is he names each one of these a friend that he has killed, a friend that he has killed, and a wife that he has killed. So if you have a tower built after you by Herod, you should probably run for your life. Okay? And so these towers were actually built by Herod the Great. They were destroyed by the Muslims when they came to town, rebuilt by the Crusaders. And so what's standing today is all Crusader era. They still call it the Tower of David by tradition, but it has nothing to do with David. But what does have something to do with David is the place called the City of David. This is actually very significant. So what we have here is the Temple Mount, and over here's a topography map just showing the layout of the terrain, and I didn't pick up on this. Reading through the Bible, I've never noticed this before. Solomon decides to build his temple on Mount, I didn't know, Moriah. Somebody's read their Bible more than me. Mount, okay, no, you can just read. Somebody can read a map better than I can. Mount Moriah. What else happened at Mount Moriah? Abraham and Isaac. Where God calls Abraham to go and offer up Isaac as a sacrifice. And that is where Solomon builds a temple. David's not allowed to build a temple because he shed too much blood, right? But David still builds up a city, builds up Jerusalem. And so this is the area of the city of David, just south of where the temple would be built by his son. So on this map, you've got Mount Moriah, and then you've got the southern hill, which is where David's palace would have been built. So on an aerial view, the Temple Mount, the city of David. Here's what it approximately would have looked like during the time of David. You would have had Mount Moriah as the highest peak, being reserved for veneration. You have David's palace above that. And you notice that it's on a hilltop, it's on a ridge line, and it's all downhill. King's up top. How easy would it have been for David to just step out on his porch and say, look at that Bathsheba down there. Very, very easy to do. Okay? So, the reason that this is so significant is they have found the foundation structures that date to the time of David. And so they know where David's palace was today. And they have found the ancient tunnel system that was built underneath the palace and that went all along the ancient city. Here's the city in the town of Solomon. Possible David's palace. I only say possible because they're not like 100% certain, but they're really, really confident that they have found it. It was found underneath a parking lot. When they were going to expand the parking lot, they started finding some rock that looked like it was a structure to something. They started investigating it more, start digging it out more, and they think, hey, wait a minute, this might be where David's palace was. They fork over millions of dollars to the people who were living around that parking lot that were actually Muslim. They were Palestinian. The reason they had to give them millions of dollars was because they had to flee the country. Because they were viewed as traitors to the Islamic faith by taking money for a cause that can validate the Bible over the Quran. All right, I'm going to speed up just a little bit. This is a really cool view. Right here, just below me, is where David's palace would have sat. And then this is Mount Olives. And so it's really cool just to see those in perspective. And how it's very likely that Jesus would have been in this general area, because I'm on the route from the temple down to the area of David's palace. So Jesus could have had a view like this. The spring of Gihon is very significant. The spring of Gihon was the natural water spring where David built the city. It is the water source for Jerusalem. Now, I'm not going to promise you it's the only water source today, but it's still a major water contributor today. But in ancient Israel, it was the water source for Jerusalem. When David builds the city here, builds up, it was already a city. David makes it the capital and builds it up more. But something happens during Hezekiah's reign. Does anybody remember what big baddies came to town during Hezekiah? There's one that starts with an A and one that starts with a B. Okay, that starts with an S, but he was the one in charge. Sennacherib of the Assyrian Empire. In the 700s, they conquer the northern kingdom. They come charging south to Jerusalem. They lay siege to Jerusalem, which looked like this during the time of Assyria. And how do you win siege warfare? Yeah, so it's a supply-based type of warfare. So you starve out the city. And so Hezekiah, he sees this natural spring of Gihon, and what do you see about this spring? Is it outside the city or inside the city? It's outside the city. So this spring, the Assyrian army is coming to town because they want to play, and all of the fresh water in the area is going outside the city. So Hezekiah says, this is a problem. We are not going to last very long if that water stays there. So what Hezekiah does is he hires a team of engineers to reroute the spring so that it stays inside the city. And so he takes the spring, which used to run down into the valley. He has one team go south which in New Testament times is the pool of Siloam. John chapter 9, Jesus heals a blind man, tells him to wash in the pool of Siloam. Hezekiah reroutes the spring of Gihon and has it run into to fill up a pool and builds a pool down here. I can't promise you when it was called Pool of Siloam. I just know that by the time of Jesus it was called that. I don't know if Hezekiah called it that. This is an engineering feat that no one really knows how they did it, because there's no electricity, there's no light bulbs, torches can only burn for so long, especially when you're in an underground tunnel that's filled with water. And this tunnel is some 1,500 feet long. And he has one team start here and another team start here, and they've got a hammer and they've got a chisel. And they're just chiseling along for that entire distance, and they meet in the middle. And now obviously there's a little bit of curvature here where they might have kind of done some redirecting, but we're really not sure how they did it with the technology they had at the time, being a hammer and a chisel. And so I got to walk through that tunnel, which was really cool. And so all of these little marks, it might be kind of hard to see in the picture, those are chisel marks. So that's not just like the natural rough surface of the stone. Those are chisel marks that Hezekiah's engineers made in the stone as they're rerouting the spring. So it's really cool to be able to walk through there. And here's the outlet, the spring of Gihon, or the pool of Siloam is right outside these stairs. There's the pool of Siloam, western wall. Okay, I'm getting very low on time. I still got a lot, so I'm going to really pick it up and just pause at the much more cooler ones that I want to share. The western wall is the closest that Jews can get to the old temple today. And so this is considered the holiest site for them. And so daily there's hundreds of Jews that will come here to worship. And on the Sabbath, which starts Friday at 1800, 6 p.m. Normal person time, this whole square is filled with people all worshiping, because this is as close to the temple as they can get. Muslims control the inside of the wall, right? So the Jews aren't allowed in. I've already talked about the size of the stones of the Temple Mount from Herod the Great, weighing 600 tons. Alleged Last Supper, we don't know for sure. It's just a tradition, but it's kind of cool to think about. You've seen my Shiloh pictures, so let's skip ahead. Okay, Pool of Bethesda. I'm going to try to do this in 60 seconds. I did a whole sermon on the Pool of Bethesda, so just go to my Facebook, go to the Buckhannon Church of Christ page, go to my YouTube page. You can see my full sermon I did on the Pool of Bethesda, because I love this site. Pool of Bethesda, so Temple Mount, right? This is Jerusalem. Pool of Bethesda is outside the city wall, just to the north of the temple. So here on the map, Pool of Bethesda, temple, Pool of Bethesda. That close? Here's the thing. There's no entryway here. So if you go read the end of John 4 and read into John 5, Jesus is coming from the north, from Galilee, coming down to worship for Passover. He bypasses the entryway to the city, which he would have had to have done to get into the temple. He stays outside the city, and he stops at the Pool of Bethesda to heal the lame man. And I think I've already used up most of my 60 seconds. The point is, archaeologists have found evidence that this was a Greco-Roman pool of healing dedicated to the god Asclepius. And if you've ever been to a medical facility today, then you've assuredly seen the symbol of Asclepius. It's the staff with the snake wrapped around it. That is the symbol of Asclepius, the Greco-Roman god of healing. So people would come to this pool to try to be healed, and Jesus singles out this lame man who can't get into the pool, and he chooses that man to heal him. And what's interesting is he doesn't tell him to go into the water. Right? The Pool of Siloam, he tells the blind man to go wash in the pool. But at this pool, he just says, stand up, take your bed and leave. And the reason is because those waters were dedicated to a false god. So for more, you can refer to the sermon. So there's Asclepius. Here's the pool today, Pool of Bethesda. Jericho. Pop quiz time. What brought the walls down? It's like answering Jesus, the Bible question. Yeah, God did. Yeah, what was the command? March and trumpets and shout. Yeah. So it wasn't until I reread the text to confirm this. I always thought it was the trumpet blast that brought the walls down. It's not. It's the voices. It's the shout that brought the wall down. But here's something else to show my naivety. Here's your trumpet. Okay. See, I think when I read in the Bible, I see trumpet and I see horn, I'm thinking they got a bunch of brass buglers out there. I had never connected the dots, even in English, that horn. This is a ram's horn. I never I don't know, that's kind of dumb. But, let me see if I can do this. Not very talented, let me try one. There we go. So, they would march around the city doing that. So, that's just kind of another neat little souvenir I picked up there. I got one for Edmund so he can try to make me crazy. Alright, let me get my notes pad up here and continue flying through this as soon as I found where I set the clicker. Need that. Alright. So, Jericho, yada yada yada. 2-wall structure, total footage, about 30 foot total each. Very large walls. One of the greatest fortified cities in ancient time. Not a big city, only about 6 acres, 6 to 10 acres. Not huge. Very, very well fortified. Israelites don't have enough supplies to conduct siege warfare. Okay? They could not have conquered this city without God, period. And the archaeology that was found here, to show you how archaeology works, right? It's a science, and all science doesn't have opinion, it just has data. And so the conclusions that science tells is drawn by scientists that have to interpret data. Now here's the incredible thing. When they've done their scans on the ground area and where the walls came tumbling down, what they found was that these walls kind of like crumpled, like kind of from the inside and fell outward. And so it has the same type of hallmark as being an earthquake. And so an earthquake destroyed the walls. That's if you don't believe the Bible's true. If you believe the Bible's true, you say, this matches perfectly what the Bible says, that a shout causes the walls to come tumbling down. And so God, through the power of God, their shout resonated with the force of an earthquake and brought the walls down. And so it's just powerful because the evidence of the walls and the evidence in the ground was not that these walls were destroyed by some external force battering them in, but they just kind of crumpled in the same way that an earthquake would bring a building to the ground. Here's your wall. Still not standing. Herodium is a really cool place. Not a lot of biblical significance, though, other than this is a man-made hill that is every bit of about 500 feet or more high. I didn't break out a tape measure. But this was all valley, and Herod says, I want to be buried there. And all of his servants say, oh, okay, no problem, King Herod. And he said, no, not here, up there. And they're like, that's the sky. And I want there to be ground up there, and that's where I'm going to be buried. So faith that moves mountains. Herod's servants were able to make a mountain where there was a valley, and he builds this giant mausoleum for himself. It's the only place that he names after himself. He calls this area Herodium after himself. It's his mausoleum, where he had a theater, guard tower. It's still standing today. It was only discovered in 2007. It was covered in sand from sandstorms. No one knew it was there until all of a sudden they got clear enough. It's like, hey, we think there's buildings on top of that hill. 2007, and now they found it, built during time of Herod. Beautiful view. Beautiful view. Here's an artistic rendition of what it would have looked like in the time of Herod. So here's your mausoleum. Here's on a map. Did I show the map view? Just as a point of reference, where it's located. So Herodium is just south of Bethlehem. So Herodium was like Herod's winter home as well. He didn't go there only to die. He went there for plenty of parties as well. It was kind of an escape for the rich and wealthy. And Bethlehem is almost in the perfect center between Jerusalem and Herodium. And so the two places where Herod spends more time than anywhere else, Jerusalem and Herodium, Bethlehem's in almost the perfect middle, which is where Jesus was born. Talk about being born in the valley of the shadow of death. That's right where his enemy, who's going to commit infanticide, is. Okay. Hurry up, Tyler. You're running out of time. Hurry up, computer. We talked about Shepherd's Fields. The Elah Valley. I'll just get to this one. I didn't take this. Again, I could fly my drone here. I didn't have time to fly my drone here. 1 Samuel 17, Battle of David and Goliath. It's my favorite sermon I've ever done. You can find it on my YouTube. But now that I've been in the valley. The Israelites were up here on this ridgeline. The Philistines were up here on this ridgeline. And David and Goliath, they meet in the middle in order for them to duke it out. But that's not exactly what happened because God gets rid of Goliath pretty quickly. I could do a whole sermon on this again. I just don't have time. But I'm standing right here. Like, this is where it happened. Like, there's no dispute. They found all of the structures that date to the right time period. They found Israelite structures up on the ridgeline where there were fortifications built. They found Philistine encampments, evidence of it all around the area. Like, this is the valley. I've got rocks from the creek where David gets the sling stones. That's a cool souvenir for Edwin to get in trouble with later too, I'm sure. Tel Gezer is a fortified city. This is important just because, biblically speaking, not a lot is known about Gezer other than it's a city that was fortified by Solomon. And so during the reign of Solomon, he takes this Canaanite city and he builds it up because it is along a huge trade route that would run right up here in the valley below Gezer from Egypt up into the upper northern Levant. Huge trade route. So Solomon, being the wise guy that he is, he says, hey, there's a lot of trade traffic that goes here. I'm going to build this city up, and we're going to get rich off of this place. And so they've found the city. There was a Hebrew calendar that was found here. This is a replica. This isn't the original. But there was a Hebrew calendar that was found dating to the 10th century, the time of Solomon, showing that the Hebrews not only had a written language, but also had a very good astronomy system to have an accurate 12-month calendar in the time of Solomon. This is Solomon's gate that he built up. And they found that. Another one that they found, had I known what these stones were, you can see the height of these. I would not have been smiling when I took this picture. I didn't get the info from my professor till after I snapped this shot. These are stones dedicated to Molech. Does anybody remember one of the #1 ways to worship Molech? Kill the babies. Kill the babies. You know what they found? They found infant bones that have been charred and burned. This was a place where infanticide was practiced by the Canaanites. Not a happy place. It was Planned Parenthood for the, 1100s BC. Bet Shemesh, place near Samson's birth, place where the Philistines return the Ark of the Covenant, right? Because the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant, and then the Ark of the Covenant, through God, starts killing all the Philistines and terrorizing their city. So they say, we don't want this. It's killing all our people. We're going to send it back. They send it to Bet Shemesh, a Jewish town. And so, thanks to archaeology, I don't have a great picture of it. We didn't have enough time to explore this area. These are buildings. Sorry, they found it. So that's all you need to know. They found it. Okay. So we know Bet Shemesh. Caesarea Philippi. This was in my sermon, so I'm not going to recap all this. Gates of Hades, one of my favorite places. Tel Dan. All right, I'm going to hit this one for Connie because she's been reminding me to keep watering this seed. Okay. So Tel Dan. Tel Dan goes south. In Joshua 19, the 12 tribes are given their allotted terrain by God through the casting of lots. And Dan is told, this is your town. This is your region. This is your area. This is where you will occupy. Dan's next door neighbors are the Philistines. Now, this is going to be predating David by a few hundred years here. Dan is given that land with the responsibility and the expectation that they're going to take over the Philistines. If they had listened to God, how much more peace would there have been in the region? But instead of obeying God, they say, God, have you seen how tall those guys are? No thanks, God. We're going to go elsewhere. We're going to go somewhere where there's not giants, and we're going to go somewhere where the ground is a little bit more fertile. I know it's along the Mediterranean, so they would have had really good fishing, but the ground's rocky and dry, not great for agriculture. So that what they do is they move up north and they build a city up with big brother Naphtali, or Naphtali, I've heard it pronounced different ways. City of Dan up here. Problem is, as soon as they go up to Dan, Naphtali, they haven't pushed out the, I think it was the Aramaeans, don't quote me on that. but it was another Canaanite village that was in that region that they were supposed to push out of the land, and they don't do it. So the Danites, as soon as they move up there, they start worshiping pagan gods. So there's like a double disobedience. We're not only going to not trust God to go where he told us to, but when we go to a better place, we're going to just worship the false gods that are being worshipped there. For idea of fertility, this was the most beautiful land I saw in everywhere I got to see in Israel. It has gorgeous, beautiful, West Virginia style whitewater rivers. I didn't get a picture of it. I wasn't fast enough. I got to see freshwater blue crabs crawling along this river. I didn't know that was a thing until I saw one. It was really cool just to see this. I'm just walking along and somebody says, "It's a crab," and I look down and sure enough there's this little blue crab just crawling along. The water's just as clear as can be. And it's just beautiful lands. And it's just, I kept saying we're going to water the seed because we need to remember when we want to come to God, when we want to serve God, we do it on his terms, not ours. Okay? If the Danites had just trusted God to do it his way, it would have saved the Israelites so much heartache. It would have spared them from being absorbed by this false religion. And we just need to remember that today, that religion is not your choice, right? If you want to serve God, you serve God his way, not your way. Okay? Now, you can disobey God, but there'll be consequences for that. There's an ancient Canaanite structure that predates the Danites by several hundred years. This fortress, it actually dates to about the time of Abraham, close to 2000 BC. And I know it's hard to see in this picture. You can just see the silhouette of it right here. But there's an archway as the primary entryway into this fortress. And that shouldn't be there by modern understanding of history. It's the Romans that do arches in the time of Jesus with the spread of the Roman Empire. So what is this main city archway doing in 2000 BC? Well, it tells us that ancient peoples were a little smarter than we give them credit for. Something else important is that this is the land of Laish, or Laish. I've heard it pronounced both ways. This is the city where Abraham goes to rescue Lot. Now, no one's so bold as to say Lot was ever in this structure. We don't know the exact area, but this is the right region where Abraham was rescuing Lot. And they have found a mud brick structure that the architecture of it really, the brick is very fine, small, level bricks. Most ancient buildings are large rock that are roughly hewn. These, it almost looks like modern brick. Like you see red brick buildings out here, it almost looks like that. Ancient peoples were pretty smart. They found the Dan Stell inscription here. This is very important for the Bible evidences as well. The Dan Stell inscription is the oldest reference to King David that's ever been found. It dates to about the time of Solomon, if I remember correctly. So just one generation after David, it refers to the house of David, and it was found here. There's a picture of it referring to the house of David. This is from a museum website. I didn't take that. They've got that under lock and key. That's a pretty important finding. Skip over the judgment seat. They found Chorazim. Not a lot in the Bible about Chorazim, other than in Matthew 11, verses 20 through 22, Jesus says, "Woe unto Chorazim, because Jesus had performed many mighty works there, and yet they did not believe in him. And as such, Jesus foretells their destruction." And sure enough, this is all that's left. It's just a rubble on a hillside. We talked about Capernaum, Sermon on the Mount, talked about the first century synagogue. Here's a millstone that I don't remember now exactly. I should have made better notes of this while we were there. But I think this was from the Roman time period. I think this millstone was from the Roman time period, but I just don't remember with great specificity. But Jesus is in Capernaum when he gives the teaching, "Whoever receives one such a child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned into the depth of the sea." So Jesus is in Capernaum when he says this. You can look out from Capernaum and see the Mediterranean Sea, and they have millstones that are found in that area. It's just really cool to think about that. Galilee, I don't have the depth of it, but it gets pretty deep. Peter's house, talked about that. Jordan River, just for point of reference, the Jordan River goes from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. And now, it might have been Aunt Connie or somebody was asking about if I got to see where Jesus was baptized. We don't know exactly where he was baptized. There's a couple really good theories out there of where it likely was. We don't know for sure, but we didn't have time to go to either one of those places. Where we did get to go was up north, closer to the Galilee, closer in this area. It's believed that Jesus' baptism probably happened down further south, closer to the Jericho area, but we don't know for sure. But the Jordan River is very beautiful. I won't say give a percentage because we only got to travel along the Jordan River for a few miles, but the section we got to travel was just like this oasis the whole way. It's very beautiful, but it's shallow and rocky. So it was an excellent fresh water source for survival, not a shipping route. It's not deep enough to do any shipping through. They found Magdala. They were going to build a resort right here, and they start digging. And what do they find? They find rocks that look like they were built up intentionally, so they have to bring in some experts to start studying and excavating it. And they found the ancient city of Magdala, which is where Mary Magdalene is from. And that would be Magdala. I didn't put this pin here. That was a screen grab. Magdala was just a little to the south of Capernaum. All right, this is going to be the last major site. I know I'm already way over time. Thank you for your patience. I promise I won't go to midnight. I'm wrapping up. This was a really fascinating site. The Church of Gallicantu. This was built. This church was built in honor of the memory of Peter's denial. And the experts and the scholars are very certain that this is the correct place. This was the house of Caiaphas, the high priest, whose bones they have found in an ossuary. It'd be located down here on the map. So for reference, the temple's here. We have the Tower of David over here. We have the judgment seat of Pilate along this wall here, this outer city wall. And the high priest of Caiaphas, his house was over here. So here's the Pool of Siloam, just to round us out, a place that we've talked about, Pool of Siloam. Just up the hill from the Pool of Siloam, where the high priest Caiaphas had his house. This is where Jesus was held prisoner for just a brief time during the night of his betrayal. And you know what they found inside of this church, in the lower areas? They found a cistern. We did some singing there. I don't have time to share that story. They found prison cells. It is certain that Jesus was in these prison cells. Again, you talk about evidences for the validity of the Bible. They found the house of Caiaphas, where Jesus was held prisoner. And in the courtyard, just outside of this church, there's this statue showing Peter, and he's got his hands held up, and what he's doing, he's saying, "No, I don't know the man." And these steps here, these actually do date to the 1st century. This was along the road that Jesus would have been led while being, I'll say handcuffed. I don't know how he was bound, but being led by the soldiers up this path and up to the house of Caiaphas. And would have been in this courtyard area where Peter's denial occurred. This is the last place on my slides. These are the southern steps. These are the southern steps of the temple. And I'm just going to show a few pictures, and then I'll give just a little bit of more story about it. These things are massive. They go along the length of most of this wall. We're talking well over a football field in width across here. This is more than a football field in length, and it's these just huge steps. What's interesting, you can't really tell it in this picture. These steps, when they were built by Herod the Great, one generation before Jesus, the steps were built intentionally that each step was of a different size than the previous. They were called humility steps. This was a common practice at that time, and I think, if I remember right, there's actually some Catholic churches that have followed this tradition. They're called humility steps because every step is a different size, so you always have to be looking down. It puts you in a posture of humility when you're climbing up these steps. And here's, this is a giant model of the city. I'm not like aerial drone here. This is a model of what the city looked like in the 1st century, just to show the extent of the steps. This was the main entryway into the Temple Mount. So whenever it would be Passover time, Jews from all across the Roman Empire at the time, all across the world, tens of thousands of Jews would come to celebrate the Passover, and they would all enter into here. In the southern steps, and here's another picture from the top looking out. Yeah, here's where I'll pause. You've got tens of thousands of Jews that are coming. But here's the thing. To enter into the Temple Mount, you have to be clean. You have to be ritually clean, which means you had to be baptized. And so this is a little bit of baptismal history I didn't know until just recently through this trip and reading into this field more. When John the Baptist comes and is preaching baptism, he's not inventing something new. This was a Jewish tradition that had started during the intertestamental time period for cleansing. John just takes what they're already doing and he says, this is now going to apply to the Messiah. This temple purity is now going to apply to approaching Christ. There's over 40, mikvot is the Hebrew word for baptismal site. A mikvot is a bathtub for ritual cleansing. There was over 40 of these excavated around the southern steps. Not to mention the Pool of Siloam is only about 100 to 200 meters to the south of this. When you've got tens of thousands of Jews that are coming, they're going to the Pool of Siloam and they're going to these mikvots and they're being baptized to enter into the temple. And in Acts chapter 2, when Peter gives the first gospel sermon, they say, what do we need to do to be saved? And Peter's response is, you need to repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. Peter was standing on these steps. And now the text doesn't explicitly say that, but the text tells that it was during the gathering for the celebration of Pentecost, and these southern steps would be the only logical place where you would have thousands of Jews gathering in that manner for Pentecost. So the implication is that Peter is on these steps because I've heard the argument made before that, well, Peter could not have been talking about water baptism because there's not enough water in all of Jerusalem to have baptized 3,000 to 5,000 people at once. Yes, there was. They did it every Passover and Pentecost when thousands of Jews would gather together. They had these 40 mikvots for baptisms, and they had the Pool of Siloam, which was the size of 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools to perform baptisms. And so it's a really important reminder that just as in the intertestamental period, during the time of John the Baptist, and then after Peter's first sermon of Pentecost, the practice of ritual purity through a water immersion is the sign that God has chosen for us to come into a clean and renewed relationship with Him. And it's when we join in Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, as Paul teaches us in Romans 6. And that's where I'm going to leave us for this evening. And that concludes all 184 slides. I didn't go to midnight. I've still got a few hours. I can keep going if you want. I've got more stories.
You need to.
That's okay. I hit the highlights, so I appreciate you guys' patience. And so I'll turn it over to Randall or Dad, whoever's got the song invitation.